the theme of trains got embedded in my brain, and we've done 2 out of 3 dramas, and they're as corny as, I make no apologies, the more you moan, the more you will remember the points, hopefully. So you're going to see the first of these, and if you're wondering, I think you've got a taste of watch out for the rat. So hopefully this makes sense, and each week for the next couple of weeks we'll have a short drama that builds one on another. What's the purpose, or underpinning purpose, I think I've written on one of the rosters, but the basic question, what is the purpose of the church? And we're going to discover why the church exists. Now, for some of you, this, and hopefully for most of you, this is simply a reminder, but I think it's an important reminder because sometimes we stray a little bit, and it's good to come back to the foundations. So bring up the next slide. If I ask this question, what is the chief end of man? I've probably got some of the Anglicans, or people with an Anglican background, kind of going, I know the answer to that. Anyone want to have a shot at that? I see you're giving God the in guy. Tell us what the chief end of man is.
It starts with to glorify God. I can't remember.
Right, okay, let's bring it up. You did well. You got us right on the start. So this is from the Westminster Shorter Catechism. Now, if you don't know what a catechism is, I used to think it was one of the places they buried people. Apparently that's catacombs, and these are completely... a catechism is a way of teaching by having a set number of questions, and there's a response. So you learn, when you hear the question, you learn the response. So when someone would ask, what's the chief end of man? If you were learning the catechism, you would say, man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, which is a really good thing. Thank you. Let me see if I can get this. Just bear with me. Just have a little bit of a think while it's gearing up, which is a great thing. That's not a bad thing at all. Except I probably wanted to go back, rather than refer back to the Westminster Catechism. I thought, let's go back to some of what Jesus himself said. And I'm not trying to put down the Catechism, because you can find scriptural reinforcement for enjoying God, glorifying God and enjoying him. There's no doubt about that. Let me just get the right view. But I want to bring up the next one, and if you remember nothing else, I want to suggest that the purpose of the church is to make disciples. So when Jesus, in the passage that Elise read to us earlier on, out of Matthew 28, go into all the world and make disciples, baptising them and teaching them, and I'm with you to the end of the age. If you were to look at those verses in Greek, there's different ways that you can work out what is the key words out of all of those words. Now, I once heard a missionary preach on this, and he spent his entire sermon on go, the command to go, which is in one sense correct. We are called to go. We're not called to stay and be in a holy huddle. We're called to go. But it's not the main point. If you went back and through studying the Greek text, got to the very heart, what were the key aspect, what stands out in all of those verses is the command to make disciples. And the reason you go is to make disciples, and the way you make disciples is by teaching and baptising. And so this whole, the weight, the emphasis, the power in these verses is when Jesus was leaving his disciples, he said, I'm going to give you one job. Make disciples. And I want to suggest that that is still the task, the main task of the church, is to make disciples. You could come back and say maybe the main task of the church is to make disciples, but glorifying God and enjoying him is the main point for individuals. I'd probably say they're byproducts of being a disciple or a follower of Jesus Christ, loving him the way he wants to be lived. We do glorify and honour him. So I'm going to suggest for us, for us as a church, a purpose statement that you will probably be very familiar in some parts and maybe have a few aspects. Let's bring up the next slide. I want to suggest that the purpose of our church, or the church, is to make passionate followers of Jesus Christ who are salt and light in the community. Now, hopefully you'll recognise some verses that's drawn from. Obviously, to make disciples. So I want to give you 3 elements of that. Make disciples. Now, I've actually used a different word. I've used followers, not because it's more accurate. Disciples is more accurate. But we've been using the word disciple so long that it's lost its initial power. We can talk, oh yes, we got this, we're all disciples of Jesus. And the danger is we can become very static or very passive in being a disciple, where the concept of being a follower of Jesus Christ infers movement. I want to suggest that Jesus is in a continuing journey. And when we stop, the distance between he and I seems to increase, not theologically, but because he's on the move. And the only way for my relationship to be vital and vibrant, your relationship to be vital and vibrant, is for you to be on the move as well. One of the worst images for being a disciple of Jesus Christ is to think of it like an aeroplane who does this amazing amount of effort to get off the ground, and then they hit what we call, you know where I'm going? Cruising altitude. And they get to that kind of comfortable place and they do 90% of their flight there. That's a terrible analogy for followers of Jesus Christ. It assumes that we do all our learning when we're a young Christian and we hit some kind of level that we just maintain. Go to church enough to stay there, read the Bible enough to stay there. And I want to say that's a terrible, I don't think it's a biblical image, because the call for us is to be followers of Jesus Christ. What were the first Christians called? Anyone know?
Followers of the way.
Followers of the way. When we say we're a follower of Jesus Christ, we're actually using a term that predates the term Christian, because that's what they were known for, to be followers of Jesus Christ. So I'm suggesting, when we say our church's purpose is to, we could say make disciples, but I'm using the word followers to infer that we're on a continual journey. Does that make sense? Now I've added in passion, the word passionate, because I think if we went back if we went to Matthew 22:37, Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment? What does he answer? Love God with all heart. That's it. And if I was to summarise that, when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, love God with all you've got. Love him with every aspect, physical, spiritual, emotional aspect. Love God with all you've got. And then he said, and love others in the same way, or as you love yourself. So I want to defend that, talking about passionate followers, because we have so many Christians in Australia or in the world that will put their hand up and say, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. And you know what? I don't necessarily want to be put in the same basket as some of those people, because they're either super critical, or they're negative, or they're passive, or it seems like I've met some people that, I remember one lady, she said, I've got the joy of the Lord in me. And I thought, way deep, because I haven't seen you smile in about 3 years. I don't know what the joy of the Lord looks like for you, but I'm hoping the joy of the Lord is something different for me. And I actually hope that when people describe me, they don't use just words like he was consistent, he was steady. Not that they're wrong. I hope when they look back on my life, they say he was passionate about Jesus Christ, about following him, about serving him. So I'm suggesting that we're not just to make followers who kind of plod along on a journey. What we're seeking to be and to reproduce is people who are deeply in love with Jesus Christ. Not in love with the church, not in love with religion, in love with the person of Christ. All those other things follow on. So I want to suggest that. And then we've got the phrase, who are salt and light in our community. Let's bring up, I think we skipped to go, so passion followers, go to the next one. Salt and light. This was another thing, as I said, as I was praying about where we're going this year, God said, get back, look at where the destination, he gave me that train image. He talked about us being salt and light. He drew my attention to that. Now, again, we know that is a biblical image that Jesus himself used. And when Jesus said these things, there was no refrigeration. That may be a shock to you. But salt had two key aspects. It had the ability to enhance flavour. I don't know about you, I love salt. I know it's not great for my blood pressure, but I just think food tastes better with salt. And caramel, salted caramel, goes a whole nother step. The only thing, sorry to any Dutch people, if you've ever tried salted licorice, has anyone tried that? I can pray for you. I was probably heading down the demonic end, but I love salt in almost anything except licorice. I think you've got to be a person with great stamina. But the nature of salt is to add flavour. And the nature of salt is it preserves things. In an era where there was no refrigeration, the preserving nature to keep what was good and stop from being corrupted. Two images of salt. For us, we're called to do those same things. Our friends, our families, our kind of social networks should be brighter and better because of our presence. We should add flavour to all we do because of Christ in us. Does that make sense? And hopefully we will not only add flavour, but we will stop corruption and decay in some sense, maybe morally or spiritually or something of that nature. And and then he says you are to be salt, so add flavour, preserve that, and then he says, and you are to be light. And light is by nature illuminating. It shows something. And so we can obviously come that we're pointing to Christ, or we're illuminating what could be in someone's life with God in them, and presenting options for them. So as we shine both the truth, the relationship we have with Christ, we send a message of hope to a world around us. Now, when Jesus used these two images, for both these images, he talked about the ridiculous nature of using it the wrong way. So, he said, if salt has lost its capacity, and I'm saying to preserve and add flavour, what did he say it was good for? Nothing, rubbish. In fact, in one place it says the manure pile, because salt, when it's not used in the right way, doesn't preserve, it'll kill. Yeah. And he says salt, if it's not out there doing its job, is pointless. That's what Jesus is saying. And he says, and who in their right mind lights a lamp and then puts it under a bushel or hides its very light? He's teaching about salt and light and putting out like a ridiculous kind of scenario. Because for him to be salt and light and to not illuminate, to not add flavour, to not impact the community around us is as ridiculous as saltless salt. So I don't know if you can buy low salt. Sounds crazy. But saltless salt or a light that's turned off. And in Jesus' day, a lamp cost a significant amount to keep running. And he said, why would you put that energy in and then hide the very thing it was meant to do? Friends, having a light that's turned off doesn't do the job it was designed for. It saves money. Okay? It's like not turning on your hearing aid. The batteries will never go flat. But it's pointless. And the other thing is that salt in a salt shaker, even though it has the potential, it doesn't do its job while ever it's in the salt shaker. While ever it's in the salt shaker, it doesn't do its job. It preserves nothing and adds flavour to nothing. For some reason, over the centuries, people have started to treat church as the safe place to come, to huddle together so that the big bad world doesn't corrupt us. That's not the image of salt and light. This can become a salt shaker that contains all the goodness, all the knowledge, all the correct theology, all that stuff, and it internalises it. Doing stuff for one another is not wrong. But when it doesn't go outside the physical walls of this building or the relational walls of this family, it fails to be salt and light that we're called to be. So my suggestion is, bring the next one, that our purpose is not to run programs. It's not to provide church services. It's not to run hospitals or universities. As good as all of those things are, youth is not about having a youth group. It's about discipling young people. Children's ministry is not providing a distraction during the service so that kids don't get bored. It's about discipling children to be followers, passionate followers of Jesus Christ. The kind of passion that I hope is reflected time and time again from the prayer that was read this morning. When a 9-year-old boy carries us to the throne of grace. That's what I call passion. So I think it's an important thing. Let's go to the next slide. There is a point. The R.A.T came, Railway Adventure Tour. Jude said that you were standing in the same place you preached from, dressed the same way you preached. People are probably going to come up and try and book a tour. You know, the whole point of this particular part of the drama, do you remember there were 3 things that the presenter said that they would measure for Railways Australia tours? Do you remember what they were? Growth, variety, and that it was rail focused. And in that little play, it says that's what we'll measure. That's how we'll know we're achieving our purpose. Now, growth, variety and rail transport is not the message of the church. It's not the measurement of the church. So we've got to say, what will we measure? How will we know we're being faithful to what Jesus has called our church and every church to be? And I'm suggesting it's all around discipleship. So let me bring up the next one. This little book is a subversive little book. What is it? It's about 100 pages long and small pages in big print. I've given this to all the leaders of the last 3 churches that I've ministered in because I think this gets under our skin and reorients us away from just producing what we've always produced, a Sunday service, a youth group, a children's program for the people who already come. The guy is actually a friend of mine, Andrew Turner, and he says, stop measuring growth or even the health of a church. Start to measure the fruit. We were planted. Remember when Jesus talked about us personally, he says, be connected to the vine, abide in me, let me abide in you. and you will produce much fruit, and by your production of fruit, my Father is glorified. Well, I want to suggest to you that at least that's not the only fruit. I want us to produce the fruit of the Spirit. I want us to glorify God in our own lives. But as a church, I want to suggest that what we should measure is passionate followers of Jesus Christ who are out there being salt and light in the community. And I think we've got a head start. I was talking to Jim last week, and I think it's Sienna came back from preschool stunned that her preschool buddy didn't believe in God. There's a conversation with what, a 4-year-old? A 4-year-old about God. That's what it means to see our kids become disciples of Jesus Christ. And there's a journey ahead. That's the kind of stuff we should be celebrating, not how many people we get here on a Sunday. That's not a bad thing. I love it. And I hope that people come. I hope you are blessed. What we do here is not wrong. It's just not all. Does that make sense? So, next slide. What will we measure? I'm suggesting here are some things we could look at. Passion for God. It's not a strict measurement, but let me ask you this. If I were to ask someone else to describe your passion for God, what kind of word would they use? Red hot? You'd hope so. Warm? Maybe not red hot, but a few stages down. On fire? Let's hope we don't go down to lukewarm, because you know what Jesus said about that. Or maybe he says barely alive. Now, I don't know, maybe we're Aussies and we don't show our emotions much, or maybe we're English and show them even less, I don't know, so I'm told. Maybe yeah, that's one of the ways. But what I'm suggesting is that sometimes we've learnt such a passive way that they could talk to us about, oh yeah, they're committed, which is good. They're regular. I think I want a word when people describe my relationship with Jesus to be a bit more forceful. And so I think we can measure. I'm not going to measure you, by the way. We're not going to have seating for the red hot, the on fire, the warm, the lukewarm, and the barely alive will become. But I think we can. How passionate are you about your relationship with Jesus Christ? And I think growth as disciples or followers of Jesus Christ, I think this, by the way, is as varied as every person here. So I want to ask the question, what would it look like and what will show in a year's time that you have grown as a follower of Jesus Christ? Because if we end 2022 the same as we started 2022, I might be as bold as to say maybe we're wasting a bit of time here. But the thing is, we often don't think, what would it look like? For some, it might be a more regulated prayer time. It might be for others to read some parts of the Bible that you've never studied before. It might be about connecting in fellowship with some other people. It might be reaching out to a friend. I'm going to suggest that in a few weeks' time, I'm going to actually ask you to develop your own personal plan for discipleship. What would that look like? What goals would you set? Because I can't make a plan for the church that suits 40 or 50 people. But what I will commit is that we will do everything we can as a leadership and as a church to help you on your journey of growth as a disciple of Jesus Christ, as a follower of Jesus Christ. We'll measure passion, we'll measure growth, and I guess impact as salt and light. A friend of mine suggested shutting his church to a very concerned church. He said, you know what? He said, I think if we closed our doors and stopped meeting, there'd hardly be a ripple in the community. The only people who would be affected are the people who already come here. And when that happens, whenever that's the case, it talks about a church that has become introspective, a church that's being salt in the salt shaker, rather than being salt encouraged, built up and released out, replenished, which is what we're supposed to be doing. So how will you be effective as salt and light to your neighbours, to your work colleagues, to your family? See, at the end of this year, when we come to say, how did we go? Let's not just say we moved from 40 to 50 people attending Sunday morning. That'd be great, that's not bad. Let's not say, isn't it wonderful that we've got 50 rather than 40 people in the youth group, or we started another ministry. All of these things are good. But what if we could turn around and say, have you seen so-and-so? They've grown so much in the last year. They're not accepting cruising altitude till they die. They're on a growing relationship with Jesus. So when John and Claire put some statistics forward, last year about youth, youth is often bigger than our church when there are combined events, and that's great. It talked about the number of volunteers, which is about people serving, and that's great. What really excited me personally was to be able to point to a dozen or more new volunteer leaders whose average age was 13. And you realise we're making disciples. We're not just running programs. So I think God wants to lay this as a foundation for us and a challenge for us. He wants us to be passionate followers of him. May you be made deeper in love with Jesus at the end of this year than you are now. And may you be effective. May the work of Christ in you overflow into all those other places. Last slide. Our purpose is to make passionate followers of Jesus Christ who are salt and light in the community. I'm throwing that out there. That will become the purpose statement of our church unless you come up with something even better. And if it's better, more God-honouring and deeply, I will happily change it. But at the moment, this is a pretty good one to work on. Let me pray and we'll finish our service today. Heavenly Father, when Jesus left his followers, I figured he gave them just something simple enough to remember. Make disciples. With all that word implies, ongoing, growing, reproducing, people passionately following you and affecting the world around them. And from those original disciples, the apostles and those who followed in the early days of the church, the world has been turned upside down for thousands of years. May we be brave enough to take you at your word. May we see ourselves not as a passive group of people that meet once a week to worship, but as a gathering of disciples, empowered and encouraged once a week to go out and be salt and light in our community. We want to honour you in all we do. We pray that your name would be glorified because of the fruit that is produced. And we pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. Next week we're going to look at some of the values that will carry us forward. And the next instalment of the R.A.T.